Hello and welcome to Ancient Gaming, where I cover all games and show you how to play them. Today I'm talking about controversial figures, harbingers of joy and despair. They have been condemned and revered. They have brought people to their knees and lifted them to the heavens. We'll go back to the bones, because I'm talking, of course, about dice. This is Ancient Gaming, and for this video I bring you a story about gods and gambles. A fundamental in nearly all religions is some sort of mechanism whereby the deity may be consulted and, if willing, make his or her wishes known to the suppliant. Some anthropologists see in sortilege or divination by mechanical means the origin of simple games of chance. But keep in mind, games of chance are possibly older than history itself. Leisure is as embedded in the human nature as his tendency to seek answers in superstition and the supernatural. So, to answer this question, we would have to move into prehistorical ground, and it will be rather difficult to know what came first, the chicken or the egg. The game of odds and evens is one which has been used for divination purposes from the first recordings of history to this day, and is still used by virtually every culture. Whether it's through cards, pebbles, sticks, or even nuts and grain, the procedure is the same. The question is posed, the lot is cast, and the answer is deduced. Thus, as you have probably noticed, we face our first problem. That is, what is a die? Or what is that makes dice exactly? We probably agree these are dice, but what about these ones? Are they dice or are they something else? The Encyclopedia Britannica, for example, defines dice as small objects or polyhedrons used as implements for gambling and the playing of social games. But I find this definition incomplete, as it leaves out the core essence and purpose of the mechanism in favor of convenience regarding its popular contemporary form and use. According to this definition, knucklepuns, for instance, wouldn't be considered dice, and they were used extensively throughout history in countless gambling and chance games, including those played with our familiar cubical dice. In other words, this definition is enough for our everyday purpose, but if we want to properly understand the evolution and history of gambling and chance games, we need something else. For this video, I will go with dice being just objects or mechanisms through whose manipulation the user seeks to obtain a certain value of random nature. But, to better illustrate how dice were more than just gaming devices, we need to take a quick look to some of the ways people in antiquity meddled with the world of the divine. Conversational oracles are arguably the better known forms of divination in antiquity, as they are often portrayed in popular media and literature. To this category, for instance, belong the famous oracles of Delphi and Siwa visited by Alexander the Great. But not less popular were what are known as binary oracles, which stand in contrast to conversational oracles in that they use mechanical devices to obtain straight answers without the priest's direct intervention and personal touch, but with the god's divine intervention understood to be lurking somewhere in the process. Both forms of divination often coexisted, and there soon was a great deal of diversity and creativity within the oracles. In fact, an oracle didn't necessarily involve a priest. The word oraculum is a conjunction of the Latin oro, which here means to beg, pray or plead, and culum, the diminutive suffix. So an oracle could actually be, and was often understood as a little prayer or request, a certain message drawn from a specific ritualized action. The important thing was that the user believed that such action involved a connection with the divine. So, what does all this have to do with dice? Turns out that dice, mostly in the form of astragali or pebbles, was a very popular and convenient tool for divination. In her book Ancient Greek Divination, the historian Sarah L. Johnson provides a nice description of how some of these oracles work in Greek Anatolia based on the popular description of Pausanias. We know, for instance, of a statue of Hermes that was erected in the marketplace of a town. On the sides of these statues were inscribed 56 oracles in verse, each of which was associated with a particular combination of numbers that one could obtain rolling 5 dice at a time. In front of the statue was a table where you could find the astragali or the knucklepuns. A passerby would pick up the 5 astragali, roll them, note the combination of numbers they displayed, and then look for the relevant oracle on the side of Hermes' statue for the answer. Some historians argue 4 was the usual number of dice thrown, but the mechanism was otherwise similar for most oracles of this kind. And the same way each oracle was sponsored by a particular divinity, usually with its name preceding it, Each throw was ascribed and bear the name of a god. Thus, for example, rolling 1-1, 2 3s and 2 4s would, according to James Fraser's translation of Pausanias, direct to the throw of Saviour Zeus that said the following: "The deed which thou meditatest, go do it boldly, put thy hand to it. The gods have given these favorable omens, shrink not from it in thy mind, for no evil shall befall thee." One, however, wouldn't be so lucky if scoring 1 6 and 4 3s, for this would lead to the following advice: "Haste not, for a divinity opposes. Bide thy time, not like a that has brought forth a litter of blind puppies. Lay thy plans quietly, and they shall be brought to a fair completion." This was known as the throne of good Kronos. So you can imagine how was the throw of child-eating Kronos. Yes, that actually was a thing. There were many advices like these, all behind particular combinations, and all encouraging or deterring the user to behave or act in a certain way with more or less concise explanations. Kind of the like you would find in a horoscope nowadays. But, in addition to the divination carried out in temples in the classical times, it was commonplace for individuals to perform this kind of searchings as part of their daily lives. Suetonius tells us that Tiberius, before he became an emperor, would seek for omens by throwing golden tali into the fountain of Aponos close to the hills of Euganea. Roman emperors such as Nero and Augustus used lotteries to give away property and slaves during Saturnalian feasts and other entertainments. A popular dinner entertainment in ancient Rome was the apophoreta, in which the host distributed pieces of wood with symbols on them and then toward the end of the evening had a drawing for prizes that the guests took home. And this kind of lottery practice was not exclusive to the Greco-Roman culture. The Old Testament, for example, has many instances where the casting of lots is used to determine a decision or distribute property, like in Numbers 26:55, where Moses allocates territory to the tribes of Israel according to each tribe's male population and by lot. The very root of the word lottery derives ultimately through Proto-Germanic from a Proto-Indo-European root and basically means to distribute large quantities of something. It just happens that in many cases whatever was distributed was done by what we would now understand as pure chance, using tools that follow the definition I gave for dice at the beginning of this video. That is, objects or mechanisms through whose manipulation the user seeks to obtain a certain value of random nature. These kind of practices were common for all sorts of people. The only thing that was needed was any kind of dice and faith. Whatever the matter, people made decisions based on chance all the time, the same way you have perhaps once solved a dispute by tossing a coin. It just happens that dice are a very convenient tool to draw a random number and have for this reason been used on games that rely heavily on chance since the very existence of such games, like the royal game of Ur in Mesopotamia or hounds and jackals in Egypt. The dice people used to play their casual and gambling games were no different than the ones they used in oracles. And even outside of divination, many of the different combinations were still named after gods, mythological figures or great personalities. In Greece, for example, the highest score you could get with 4 dice was called the Euripides, but they also had the Aphrodite, Solon, Midas, Alexander, and many others. Romans, on the other hand, called the highest throw the Venus, and both called the lowest throw the dog or, less frequently, the vulture. Romans in particular were quite fond of dice and gambling, as we can tell from the many testimonies that have survived up to this day, both written and material. The historian Rodolfo Lanciani wrote at the end of the 19th century how the love of the Romans for games of hazard was so intense that wherever he had excavated the pavement of a portico, a basilica, a bath, or any flat surface accessible to the public, he had always found gaming tables engraved or scratched on the marble or stone slabs. Even children were initiated into the seductions of gambling by playing nuts or alea, a popular pastime also within elder people. So strong, in fact, was the passion for nut gambling, and so heavy were the losses of many gamblers, that special laws were passed from time to time by which the popular sport was declared a punishable offense, except in the days of the Saturnalia. The thing is, people gamble with everything about everything, and despite the many laws and prohibitions issued against gambling, Romans would continue to gamble on a regular basis, mostly in taverns, but essentially everywhere, even in the forum. Many emperors themselves were avid gamblers, with the Emperor Claudius going as far as to publish a book on the art of dice gambling, and having a board fitted in his carriage in a way that no one would disturb his game when traveling. Also in the Lives of the Caesars, written by Suetonius, the author remarks Augustus' passion for gaming, and recalls a letter from the emperor. "We gambled like old men during the meal both yesterday and today, for when the dice were thrown, whoever turned up the dog or the six put a denarius on the pool for each one of the dice, and the whole was taken by anyone who threw the Venus." Slaves or emperors, people were ready to surrender their hopes and money to the throw of the dice, and this was done with the confidence and expectation that the gods would guide their fortune and destiny. Or was it? In the Divination, Cicero makes an interesting argument against the divine nature of random events, and ponders about what to me looks like a honest expression of secular probability. Nothing is so unpredictable as a throw of the dice, and yet every man who plays often will at some time or other make a Venus cast. Now and then, indeed, he will make it twice, and even thrice in succession. Are we going to be so feeble-minded, then, as to aver that such a thing happened by the personal intervention of Venus rather than by pure luck? Well, apparently, many would. Here's another fragment, this time from Lucian, telling the story of the young man who fell madly in love with Praxiteles Venus of Cnidos. He wrote, "He threw 4 thalli on the table and committed his hopes to throw. If he threw well, particularly if he obtained the image of the goddess herself, no two showing the same number, he adored the goddess and was in high hopes of gratifying his passion. If he threw badly, as usually happens, and got an unlucky combination, he called down curses on all Cnidos, and was as much overcome by grief as if he had suffered some personal loss." As you might guess, and as Cicero proves right before, not everyone bought into the explanation of divine intervention behind dice throws and lots, at least not for every situation and circumstance. And some would find hard to believe the gods would even bother intervening in their casual game of backgammon, if they actually even bother themselves giving any thoughts to the metaphysics behind it. Probably, most people would just throw the dice and hope for the best, without giving any more thought to it. Some people even thought dice were not a matter of luck or grace, but of skill, like how do you put your hand when you throw them, the strength behind it, and things like that. But it would be rash for us to assume Cicero's point of view was the common thought within the masses. In fact, it was quite possibly the opposite. Remember that the different combinations were named, after all, after the name of the gods, and the gods were indeed very present in the lives of people in antiquity. In fact, the pondering about randomness of the pagan philosophers would be put aside with the advent of Christianity, whose major intellectual exponents gravitated towards the idea of God's detailed control over all aspects of life. But that's a story for another day. Dice are one of the big ones of ancient gaming, so expect to hear more from them in the future. Today, sadly, I don't bring you any game. I wanted to keep these videos short and kind of like giving it a more historical format. I will bring another game in another video separately, but of course I will be keeping videos with both history and gameplay. I will quickly show you though some knucklebones. Many of you probably played with them when you were little. But to those of you who don't know them, I thought it would be at least interesting to see how you play with them. So, knucklebones are basically that, the knucklebones of sheep or goats that were often crafted also with other materials, like brass, copper and different kind of minerals. Remember I mentioned before how Tiberius used to throw golden thalli into the fountain of Aponus? Thalli was the name Romans often used to refer to astragali, which is the word Greeks use for knucklebones. The simplest form of this game was mainly played by children and women, and it is similar to the modern-day game of jackstones. All 5 small pieces were simultaneously tossed into the air, the goal being to catch as many as possible on the back of one hand. Another variation of the game involved players throwing one or more of the pieces into a small dirt hole in the ground or into the opening of a small vessel. The player with the best aim would win. It was also common for women to use them for love throws. This was especially true of young and married women who, by playing knucklebones, were thought to be entrusting themselves to Aphrodite. In Greek, young noble women were often referred to as philastragalai, or loving knucklebones, so you can guess it was a popular practice. Men, on the other hand, treated knucklebones like modern conventional dice and loved the gambling aspect of it. Using usually 4 knucklebones, they would throw the pieces onto the ground or a table. As we have seen, each side represented a different numerical value so that each knucklebone throw was calculated. Differently from the modern game of dice though, it was not the side of the knucklebone that faced up that counted. but the side that landed on the surface. Although each knucklebone side was different and therefore did not require a numerical marking, often, for the sake of convenience, numbers were inscribed on the pieces, omitting the 2 and the 5. There is a fun instance within Greek mythology where knucklebones were used to gamble about the ruling of the world. In the book 15 of the Iliad, the god Poseidon explains how did he end up ruling the seas, while his brothers Zeus and Hades gained the heavens and the underworld respectively. I verily, when the lots were shaken, won for my portion the great sea to be my habitation forever. And Hades won the murky darkness, while Zeus won the broad heaven amid the air and the clouds. But the earth and high Olympus remain yet common to us all. And that's basically all for this video. So, don't forget to like the video if you learned something new, and subscribe if you want to learn more about other old games and how to play them. And if you want to go one step farther, if you know someone who might be interested in this kind of stuff, share the video. That would really help a lot the channel. We're very close to 100 subscribers. Until the next time.